My name is Scott. I'm the owner of a practice called My Brain Mechanic. I primarily have been treating traumatic brain injuries and stroke victims. Um, but one thing that has really become of interest to me is that there is a common denominator now that is associated with every single mental illness, including suicide. And this may be a chance to save some lives. You know, people that have traumatic brain injuries do tend to, in some cases, have suicidal ideations, and a lot of them have been through some horrific things in their life. But there is also a chemical component or the physical part where we can do so much that we never thought that was possible before. So we know now that schizophrenia, bipolar, cognitive impairment, moving to dementia, Alzheimer's, brain injury, stroke, suicide, depression, anxiety, all are associated with neural inflammation. Why is the brain on fire? Why are we so susceptible to this inflammation? Well, our toxic exposure has skyrocketed, our food has changed, and we need to realize that the brain is the most susceptible organ of all to oxidative stress. So, with this toxic overload that we're being exposed to now in the last decade, that is so astronomical, and we're dealing with food supplies where we've have rotated crops and the soils are depleted of essential nutrients in them, so even when we're eating healthy, we're not getting the food that we used to have 50 years ago. We have processed food. We're exposed to so many chemicals that are not tested by the EPA. There are a lot of things that are banned in Europe that are okay here. So we're just on toxic exposure. And so if we can deal with that now, because there is no drug that can reduce neural inflammation, but we also have some other things that are happening. So it's not just a brain on fire and reducing the inflammation. We're having immune dysfunction. And in many cases, we're getting autoimmune conditions within the brain. And I thought originally that was primarily set with just brain injury and stroke victims, but I'm seeing that now with more and more people in different mental health areas. And we'll look at that in some of these upcoming articles. This is a man back in 2018 who was the head a department of psychiatry at the School of Medicine at the University of Wisconsin. He was the chair for Healthy Minds, Children and Families, professor of Human Development and Family Studies, School of Human Ecology, and his name is Dr. Rayson. And here he is in 2018 saying, I find myself amazed that inflammation is frequently named as the root cause of all psychiatric conditions, the sine qua non of all mental illness. Far from being specific to any one mental illness or subpopulation within a mental illness, inflammation turned out to be the common denominator and likely risk factor from every manner of psychiatric disturbance from schizophrenia to obsessive compulsive disorder. This is telling us that we have at our disposal a whole new way of treating mental health and mental illness that we never thought possible. So this is so exciting. Um, this is a article I've used with my brain injury patients, and that a head injury causes the immune system to attack the brain. And why does it do that? Well, we have this blood-brain barrier. Probably a lot of you have heard of the term leaky gut. And leaky gut is associated with different autoimmune conditions within the body. And now we can have what's called leaky brain. Well, when you have a brain injury or your head is violently slammed or you experience a stroke, that wall that is supposed to kind of separate the body's immune system from the brain's immune system comes down. And then our brain is now open to our body's immune system coming in and not only seeing things that it doesn't recognize, but seeing inflammation everywhere and seeing a lot of we store heavy metals in our brain. Mercury, lead are stored in the brain. So our immune system is getting in there and going, what is all this? So it starts an attack. And then our brain's immune system is supposed to either the glial cells are supposed to protect the neurons or clean up damaged neurons. And now it sees all this damage and inflammation going on. So it kind of goes on the attack and you get this double whammy happening. Well, it's not just brain injuries and a lot of brain injuries and why this became uh, of interest to me was they had suicidal, or some patients of mine have had suicidal ideations. And yes, there have been psychological rationale for that. People coming back from wars or from combat that have seen things and gone through stuff. But now we also know that there's this huge component. And if we can take care of it, if somebody is at the tipping scale to suicidal thoughts. And we know that it's not just the psychiatric uh, factor, and that there's this brain inflammation going on and a breached blood barrier, and we can fix that. We can tip the scale the other way, and we could save a lot of lives. So, this is just so interesting, the role of inflammation in suicide. Suicidal behavior is complex and manifests because of a confluence of diverse factors. So I never want to take away what people have gone through. When I had a brain injury in 2014, it was horrific. And the psychological things I went through, I wish on no human being alive. But at the time, I didn't understand neuroinflammation, and I was the lead educator outside the US for the Institute of Functional Medicine. I was a wellness coach. I was training doctors, physicians, and practitioners in 23 countries, but I really knew functional medicine from the neck down and not from the head up. And one such factor involves dysregulation of the immune system, which has been linked to the pathophysiology of suicidal behavior. Every COVID long hauler has immune dysregulation and neuroinflammation. And what we're seeing is that we not only are exposing our brain now to an immune system that can go on the attack, and that we're getting dysregulation in the immune system from the upregulation of inflammation, but we are now finding that we can use certain compounds to seal the blood-brain barrier to reduce the neuroinflammation and to modulate the immune system. So there is so much more to be done beyond just brain injuries and strokes. The contribution of inflammatory conditions such as a traumatic brain injury, autoimmune disorders, and infections to neuropsychiatric symptoms and suicidality is only beginning to be explored. Um, but there are a handful of us in this world that really understand this. And the fix, knowing how to do it's the hard part, but the fix is not that difficult because many of the compounds that I use that have clinical trials and have been around and are in the right form, if they're put together synergistically, we can, with multiple formulas, do a variety of synergistic things like modulate the immune system, uh, increase neuronal activity and neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons and neuroplasticity, seal the blood-brain barrier, and reduce all of this neuroinflammation. And there are certain compounds that have the ability to do that. We do have to use sometimes, not sometimes, mostly multiple compounds, but we're not talking like 12, 15 different things. And we're able to now make massive changes in the brain. And according to the World Economic Health Forum, cancer is not the number one concern now, it's mental health. And now we know we can do something about it that we never thought possible before. Inflammation and symptoms of suicidality, alterations or aberrations in inflammatory cytokines have been reported in several neuropsychiatric conditions, including MIDD, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorders. Mechanistically, it is known that inflammation can trigger depressive symptoms and is associated with suicidal ideations based on studies involving patients who receive interferon. So basically, what they're saying here is when they induced inflammation in the brain, people they were able to trigger depressive symptoms. The depression we have today is very different than the depression we had 40 and 50 years ago. And a lot of it is environmental. And again, I never want to take away from what people have gone through, but when we know that there's this environmental trigger, and of course there's the accidents of the brain injuries and so forth, but when we have these environmental factors, this is why we're seeing such an upregulation in mental illness. Now we know what's causing it and we know what can be done, and it's treatable. We found that there's a higher degree of suicidal ideation was associated with increased inflammatory index in patients independent of the degree of depressive symptoms. So basically, what it's saying is even if the depressive symptoms were all over the board, mild to severe, the suicidal ideations are primarily being driven from this neuroinflammation. So, can you imagine the lives that we can save by knowing this? This is very interesting because COVID's back in the world now, and we've got a new variant. And COVID-19 induces neuroinflammation. Every single COVID long hauler they found out that is suffering with the brain fog and the exhaustion and loss of smell, a loss of taste, they're all experiencing and have neuroinflammation, brain on fire. And this is really scary. COVID-19 induces neuroinflammation and the loss of hippocampal neurogenesis. Our hippocampus is such a vital part of our brain, and COVID's getting to it. So whether you're pro or anti-vaccine, we're still being introduced and exposed to something that's altering our hippocampus and causing long-term neuroinflammation, and that's scary. But the good news is we can do something about it. Inflammation pattern in the brain may cause many long COVID symptoms, brain fog, exhaustion. This was in the National Institute of Health. And this again became of extreme interest to me because it's saying the blood barrier disruption and sustained systemic inflammation. So, what I originally, and I'm only a handful of people that really understand how to treat brain injuries, thought that the blood-brain barrier was primarily breached when a brain injury occurred. And now we're seeing that our blood-brain barrier is being broken down like we're experiencing leaky guts, we're having a leaky brain now more than we ever thought. But we can put that wall back together, that blood-brain barrier back together, and stop the body's immune system from attacking the brain and calming the immune system down. So there's just some amazing things that we're able to do. Um, but, and this article was another jaw dropper for me. So not only did I realize that we're experiencing a disruption in our blood-brain barrier, and this is why our immune system, our body's immune system is getting into the brain and doing a lot of damage. But this study suggests that the findings suggest that the immune system surveils the brain from a distance and only enters when it finds a problem. So it's saying that our body's immune system has on occasion entered the brain when it sees a problem. Well, if the brain's on fire, there's a problem. So even with the blood-brain barrier resealed, we can still see the body's immune system being able to get into the brain and start to wreak havoc there because it's not recognizing things and it's seeing things that are on fire basically, and then the brain's immune system doesn't know what to do because it's supposed to protect or clean up the neurons, so it's causing more inflammation. And we just got this brain on fire. So immune activity in the brain can be highly detrimental. It can kill neurons and cause swelling. So many people from brain injuries die from the swelling of the cranium. I had a brain injury in 2014, and like I said, I was the head educator outside the US for the company that created the Institute of Functional Medicine. But it took a few very special doctors, one that was a fellow at Harvard Medical, that really understood what I call now functional neurology. So it's a subsect of functional medicine. And we're just learning so much about the brain just in the last few years. And this rise in mental health illness has caused us to look and do more studies, but we're finding answers that we never had before. And unfortunately, Western medicine isn't able to do anything about it because drugs don't address resealing a blood-brain barrier, they don't modulate the immune system, and they don't know how to reduce neuroinflammation. But there are several compounds that have multiple clinical trials out there um, that do exist, and in a lot of cases are only accessible to certified practitioners like myself. And they can reduce neuroinflammation, they can rebuild that blood-brain barrier, and they can modulate that immune system. And I'll explain a little bit of immune modulation in a brief moment. But the brain can't tolerate much swelling because the cranium is a fixed volume. So many people, as I said, die from brain injuries because there's not a fracture to the skull, and it's the swelling that kills them. I had a brain injury in 2014, and luckily I fractured my skull in three places, so I didn't die from inflammation within the brain. I almost died from blood loss, but I was very fortunate because I was left alone for quite a long time before I was found. So it's just amazing that I lived through that. And I really believe I went through that whole process to get into this field of medicine to help others. And this is why I say things are so different now. The average American is exposed to not 70, not 700, not 7,000, but 700,000 toxins a day. I still am shocked when I look at this and go, people are never going to believe this. And I look it up over and over, and we are exposed to toxins in things that we drink, the water that we're in, our oceans, our the air we breathe, the upholstery we sit in. I don't know how many new chemicals keep getting introduced that the EPA doesn't even look at. There are many things that are not available in Europe that are allowed here. And so there's just a lot of toxic exposure that we never thought. And that's why, again, we're seeing brain inflammation just on the rise because of this just toxic overload. And it's causing lack of energy, depression, inability to concentrate, loss of appetite, anxiety, palpitations. These are signs of COVID. These are signs of people with brain injuries. But regular people are starting to experience this just from the toxic overload. But again, there's a lot we can be done to get to this point where we have a healthy brain and a brain that can function again like it should and bring it back to its normal state. And that's what's so exciting. To do this, um, I really have looked at one, two, three, four, five, six things that really need to happen. And one of those is we have to seal that blood-brain barrier up. We have to reduce the neuroinflammation. We've got to create cerebral blood flow because we need to make sure that certain vital nutrients get delivered to the right parts of the brain. And we have to create cerebral blood flow without causing inflammation. And there are very few compounds that do that because most on the market will increase blood flow, but they're causing inflammation within the brain. And then we need to reconnect and grow neurons. And then there's the whole gut brain axis because the gut and brain talk to each other all day. And if you have an unhealthy gut, you have an unhealthy brain. If you have an unhealthy brain, you have an unhealthy gut. And so both need to be taken into consideration. A lot of the feel-good chemicals that we have, like dopamine, GABA, norepinephrine, serotonin, these all start with a healthy microbiome. And then there is a final part here, that's immune modulation because these 700,000 toxins are coming in as what you call antigen presenting cells, and they become naive T cells. And these naive T cells can go to Th1, Th2, 17 on down the line. That's the immune system kind of throwing off bombs to get rid of the bad guys. Um, but Th3 is think of it like the Navy SEALs. So when they went to get bin Laden, they didn't blow up that whole house. They took the Navy SEALs, they went into the house. They didn't kill all the people in the house. They went in, they got the bad guy, got him out, and didn't destroy anything else. That's what immune modulation is. So people that died from COVID, they died from the cytokine storm, which was the overreaction of our immune system. So many people ended up surviving because there were some hospitals that did glutathione infusions and they were able to modulate the immune system and reduce that cytokine storm. So this is just so exciting because we're talking about the ability now to look at things beyond brain injuries and strokes and on the way to dementia, all the way from obsessive compulsive disorder to schizophrenia to suicide. And we know that if we make some changes, physical changes or alterations and reconstruct the brain, in the proper healthy way and reduce that inflammation, seal that blood-brain barrier, modulate the immune system. We can do things now in mental health that was never thought possible before. My name is Scott. My practice is My Brain Mechanic. There's a link below. You can get a free consultation with me. I'm not only a practitioner in functional neurology, but a wellness coach. I've suffered a traumatic brain injury. I do all my consultations free. So my God, if you're thinking of not wanting to be around here any longer and just need someone to talk to, book a free consult with me. That saving a life, it's everything. If you have a TBI or a stroke, I'm one of a handful of people that really understands it, and so many more mental health conditions that we're seeing now really can be addressed if we do the right things. So it's just been a pleasure to do this video and explain more about what's going on in the world with mental health and what can be done. So I hope to hear from you and look forward to bringing out more information as I do more videos.